Okay, thanks for coming back. So just a couple of items. We've still got some unclaimed prizes. So if you found a prize ticket and not your chair label when we asked you to look the first time, don't forget to go back to the back table and claim your prize. I think I've noticed a change through the day, and that is, we saw about 180 people come into this room this morning, and maybe we're not sure why they were here or what this event was about, but I think you have probably caught on throughout the day because we've had some amazing speakers, and they've been such a diverse range of speakers as well. So don't forget, we're going to ask you at some point what that one thing is that you guys are going to take away from today. So keep thinking about that while you're thinking about our last speaker. This is Jennifer Smith. She is the SVP at Cineplex Digital, has a lot of experience in industry bringing products and services to market. And she's going to talk to us today about her take on the purposeful leadership.
Oh yeah, right, my walk-up, I forgot. I chose it, so I've never done a walk-up song ever. It's actually pretty cool. And they asked me about it, and I have 15-year-old twins, thank you, and my son plays competitive baseball, so they're all into the walk-up songs, right, for going to the plate. So I'm like, hey, I need a good walk-up song, and he looks at me, he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm doing a talk, I need a walk-up song. Yeah, I got no response, so I'm like, okay, I'll just pick a song. So I picked the Queen song, and I chose it because that one in particular, because you should believe everything you see in a Hollywood movie. When I watched the biopic, I think it's biopic, of Queen, right, the band, there's a point in that movie, if you haven't seen it, where they're describing the creation of that song, We Will Rock You, and it was about, I think it was the drummer actually, who said he wanted to make a song that the crowd could get engaged with. It was about the people, right, and it came up with this, the stomp, stomp, clap, right, and that was kind of the origin of that song. So that's why I chose it, because for me, really a big part of the discussion is really around people, and I'll kind of get into that. So it's interesting, the slides aren't back there, so now I know why Ian kept looking up here. So what I wanted to do in the few minutes we have together, it'll be maybe slightly different than some of the conversations today, is I want to tell my story, a portion of my story anyway, and then I want to tie together some of the things that I've kind of gone through with my journey as it relates to desires, fears, and really how I look at my definition of success. So for the better part of 2 and a bit decades now, people have informed me I need to now go to a company that doesn't start with a C. Toyota starts with a T. Just saying. So I started my career actually working in the aerospace industry with ComDev. I spent the bulk of my career to date in the middle portion of that slide at Christie Digital Systems in Kitchener. And now I'm with Cineplex Digital Media. And the reason I show that is because there's a really long period in between there, and there's been some debate about whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. And I'm happy to share that perspective a little bit later. But what I want to talk about first is really around desires. And I use this time scale because it kind of informs what's happened for me in my personal journey along these kind of 3 companies and how I've gone through them. In the first kind of decade, I call this section competing desires. And we were just having just a moment of it in terms of conversation here on, starting in engineering and then ending up going through up on the management leader track, and how did that work, how did that feel? So the big thing for me in that first decade was really, I felt this competition. I felt a competition between, growing up and going and studying engineering and getting my degree and, being and wanting to work in technology, with realizing as I was doing it, I started really gravitating towards, but I like the people component. I like to understand the why. I like to figure out why people need the things they need in order to actually get those things done. And so I felt this tension between a heavy commitment to a 5-year engineering degree and wanting to work in the technology and really being excited by that with wanting to actually figure out how it is people actually get things done. So that technical versus management or technical versus leadership track really was that first competing desire. The second one was really around time for friends and family versus career growth. So I was going gangbusters truly at trying to spend every waking moment I could getting things done, showing that I was somebody that was worthy investing in, and it was competing with my time for friends, right? It's my mid-20s, I guess, and it was competing for time with my friends, my family, other people, right? Like it was this balance that I never really quite figured out, and I felt, again, that tension, those competing desires. And then the third piece was inclusion versus general interest. And I had no other way really to represent this than the icon I chose there. So being early in my career, a little over 2.5 decades ago, I was struggling hard with, I'm a female in a technology-dominated environment, inside largely male-dominated environments, and really trying to figure that out because my natural interest didn't really align with the interests of the people around me that were my leaders, which were mostly men. And it's not that when, men and women can't have similar interests, but I was really struggling with, I wanted to be able to express what I wanted to do on my personal time, and it was very different than what the people around me wanted to do. And I come back to that maybe a little bit later. So this kind of recognition of my space and the place that I was within, and then how do I actually figure that part out, and how do I keep advancing when the things I'm naturally good at and the things I gravitate to maybe don't resonate with the people immediately around me that in my mind actually were the ones responsible for whether or not I would be selected for inclusion in promotions, in new opportunities and new projects. So that's kind of that first period of time. And then as we evolved, or as I kept moving along in time, I started to get in what I would call the second wave of desires. And this is really, I put them into the bucket of changing. So I'm still, working through different projects, having success in my own way. And then things started to change in that second decade for me. I had kids. Well, my partner had kids. And I went from individual focus and heavy individual focus to family focus. And that made a very big shift in what was important for me. My career was still important. My ability to contribute and grow was always important. But there was this other kind of sense of obligation and not obligation out of just commitment to that family, but that there were people now dependent on me, and I had to make sure that I could take care of that. And then the second one was around changing what I call change the game. So that prior decade of trying to figure out, what at the time I could only describe as that, that boys club that I was fighting hard to be part of and to be recognized within, was we were playing the wrong game. Right? Just change the board game, because that's not a game you want to, it's not one I would ever win, and it's one that I felt wasn't genuine to who I was, right? So what I had to do is I had to step back, and this is that changing piece in the middle, is just looking at different ways to create authentic relationships, build allies across the organization that I was in, outside in the community, because that's who I naturally was. That's what aligned with me. The reason I wanted to move out of the deep technical track is because I was naturally interested in how people achieve things and the people doing the work and the people who get inspired to create things they never thought possible. That was who I was. So the changing the game and the, instead of playing Monopoly, now I'm playing chess instead, right? Was just play a different game. Just be who I was and recognize that was going to be all right. And if I had the confidence in myself, other people would as well. And so that was a big part of the middle section of just changing up, how I was kind of working. And then the last one is on that middle section was what I call climb to build. So I think I've done a lot of mentoring with other young female leaders coming up in their careers as well, and male colleagues as well. And it's amazing to me because when I step back and reflect, I spend an awful lot of time chasing title and not enough time chasing experiences. And that was a big learning for me in this kind of second wave of change. Yes, the titles were important. They did bring me things that, I don't think I would have had otherwise in terms of certain opportunities. But what it really was about, instead of always climbing and kind of chasing the next thing, I really wanted to get back to what I enjoyed most, which was building. And that was building products and services and things to take to market, but more importantly, it was building teams and people and relationships and success through them, and less about trying to achieve that next rung on that ladder of advancement. And that was a big revelation for me in kind of the middle part of this overall journey so far. So then we get out of the second decade and start crossing into the third, which is scary for me to say up here because I really don't feel old. But that's kind of where we are now, and things have changed again. And the first real significant one for me is in that top circle, which is from proving to just doing. I know when I step back and I'm honest with myself in that first 5, 10, 15 years, a lot of it was about trying to prove that I was capable, that I could do the things that people were asking me to do, that I could achieve more. Then it started to be more about I could help other people do that. But instead of, being in this headspace of, I have to prove, just got comfortable with just doing. And that was a huge shift in terms of how how you show up and how you actually contribute and how you relate to others. At least it was for me. So getting out of proving and moving just to doing. The second one in the changing landscape was from achievement to purpose. And I'm guessing through even just listening to Ian's talk, you've probably heard more about purpose and mission-driven, and I know the conference is purposeful leadership, which I'll come back to. So for me, it was less on the achievement, more on the purpose. The achievement follows the purpose, and that's kind of the big shift, and it's a bit of a mental model shift for me. Again, when you're looking at chasing title and chasing the next achievement, and even if you're doing it individually or trying to help others, it's still about achievement, not so much about the purpose. So for me, it was looking more at purpose now instead of achievement. And then the last one was grow differently. For me, this is really embodied in emphasizing curiosity and learning. That's about the growing differently. It's not about the growing by climbing, like I described, but really about what do I like to do? How do I help other people achieve their own successes? Sharing my belief in other people to grow, and then that's how I grow, right? So it's not an individual view anymore, it's a collective view. And that was probably the biggest and most significant change over the last handful of years, where I realized, and I guess maybe it would tie into Evan's give and then take, or you didn't quite say it like that, but give first, I think was his words. That's really what this would be for me too. This is a little bit of, don't worry about the climb, right? Just focus on what's genuine for you and what you can do to help the other people around you, and show that belief in those people, like people showed belief in me, which helped me achieve some of the things I wanted to achieve. The purpose will drive you, the achievements will follow. So that's kind of the landscape of desires and kind of how they've evolved over the last 20 plus years. And I think parts of them, when I sit down and reflect, that's the biggest thing, is just being able to, I think purposeful leadership comes by being able to stop and reflect and actually be vulnerable enough in your own right to stand there and know what you've done, you think maybe not correct, or a way you could have done it better. And for me, this was a big part of it, was looking at changing desires along the way. Can we go forward? There we go. So really the next piece was, and they're all kind of intertwined. I have them nicely compartmentalized for the presentation, but all these things are very intertwined. It's fears, and this is a part where, this is where you have to sit down and you have to be really comfortable with opening up some things that you probably don't otherwise naturally share with people. So for me, they started in the early, this is like right out of school, kind of into the deep engineering work, really looking hard at do it faster, do it better. And in my context, this was do it faster and do it better than the male colleagues around me, because that's all it was. And so when I step back now, 20 years later, and look at that, I wasn't the only one feeling this. My male counterparts were feeling this too, right? Because it's competitive, and it is a competitive environment in the tech space. I felt it really was. But I called this guy's a gremlin. I don't know if people recognize him, but he's from the movie Gremlins. So at the time, this is like 20 years ago, so I kind of had this, I would call them my gremlins, right? And I knew when they were out, if you will, and I knew when they were wet, if you remember the movie. So I actually have, and this crowd's probably far too young, but I have a day timer, like a Franklin Covey day timer. Come on, I can't be the only one who had one. There we go. There were a few. And I had a friend at the time who had a graphic artist make me a gremlin that looks like this guy, put him on a piece of paper, had him laminated, cut it out, and stuck it on the ruler that was inside my Franklin Covey planner that would be used to separate my pages. So like 20 years ago, I'd go into a meeting, I'd open up my Franklin day timer, right, and boom, there's this gremlin. I'm like, oh yeah, right, put the gremlin back in the box, gremlin back in the box, gremlin back in the box, right? So it was a bit of a mental cue and reminder, and a visual cue actually to just, relax, it's okay, just put the gremlins back in the box, things will take care of themselves. And then the next piece was, and I mentioned this earlier, on the changing desires over time, but it really was, fears of external perceptions around family over business. I can't even count the number of times I was not able to, or chose not to, probably more importantly, fly into the annual budget summit on the weekend early to go golfing or go yachting or do whatever else was happening. Because I didn't want to, right? I had young kids. I wanted to be home. I was traveling a lot for the work and the job as it was, and I really wanted to spend time with my family, but dying, honestly, inside every time. It was, no, I can't come ahead. No, I'm not able to come. I'll see you on Sunday. That sort of stuff, right? Choosing to give up on extracurriculars, if you will, that many, many, many other people were doing, and that I know there's work conversation happening. I know there's relationships being built. I know there's allyship being created, and feeling like you were going to be left out of that because you were choosing to be home with family. And I don't think this is just a female issue at all. I never have. But it's, it's a big piece of where the fears were born around, will I do myself and my career advancements and my career goals and aspirations enough service when I'm, making these other decisions? So that's a big, big part. It's less prominent for sure for me now. I actually don't think I care so much anymore. But I think that's come with, time and being more grounded in what's most important to me. The middle section, so this is always, I get some people get a raise out of the image here, but this was really, again, it's all fears of external perception, right? So for the first 30 of my careers, I was not openly gay. For the last 15 or however old I am now years, I have been. And so big part before and also now after was about this external perception of confident, capable, and not bitchy and butchy, right? And that's a big difference. And that was a huge piece of me and my story of just, I always felt capable. I always felt competent. I always felt caring of what I did and who I interacted with. But sometimes that fear of that perception of, capability and competence and confidence could really be bitchy, butchy, or pushy. And none of those would be true. But that was a big part of those fears. And so now we're kind of into the latter portion and the, I think it's just I looked for an 8-track tape, but I couldn't find one. So it's just a cassette there. But this fear of, remaining relevant, I think especially now with the rapid changes and almost everything occurring around us, particularly the technology landscape and working in a tech or a tech-driven organization, things are changing so fast. When I give other talks on innovation and keeping up with the pace of change, for people who've got math backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, I often call it the second derivative problem. So a second derivative is the rate of change of a rate of change. And so I think that right now what's happening around us in both social landscape and professional landscape and personal landscapes all combined is that the pace of change is so much faster. I actually am wondering if it's outweighing human capacity, although I think that doesn't give human capacity enough credit, so I think we will keep up, but it's a lot. And so for me, it's always this conversation of, and it's a head conversation, it truly is a head conversation. Sometimes it's a small audience conversation. What happens if you become outdated? How do you not become outdated? How do you stay relevant? What is it that, what does relevant even mean, right? So it's a bit of that fear, and in terms of how can you, what about the technical acumen? What do you need to know now? What about relatable experiences? How do I not feel or have other people believe that I'm outdated? That's a part of that kind of bucket there with the cassette tape. And then this last piece, and again, they're not all binary, right? Like this is a spectrum. The no longer climbing. This was that, I don't know if it's happened to other people, but I got this point a few years back and I'm like, holy shit, I'm exhausted, right? Like it's chase, 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 chase. Whether it was title or role or responsibility, whatever it was, right? But I was tired, right? I mean, having kids from 0 to 15 probably didn't help. But I was tired. And I had to step back and kind of look at, okay, so if I don't have to climb anymore, I don't want to climb anymore, I choose not to climb anymore, what does that mean? Does it make me weak? Does it make other people think I'm weak or irrelevant? Does it make me less than my colleagues or my younger peers? I don't know. I don't think so on a good day. I really think so on a bad day. I don't know. But it's that piece of, if I'm no longer climbing, is that all right? So, I always think someone else can turn my slides. Because I'm used to somebody else at the back usually marching me along. So for me, are we counting down? Yeah, down, okay. So, sorry. They did really tell me how this was gonna work. Okay, so the last part, so again, remembering it's not all compartmentalized as much as it looks like in the slides. So really this last piece, we kind of talk desires, fears, the evolution of both, and then what's the definition of success? So in my early days, it was, my dad, I love my dad, and he's like, you're so full of piss and vinegar. I'm like, Dad, that's a really bad expression. And he's like, no, it's true. I'm like, okay, so I'll give it to him in the first 10 years. And I think I probably was. And it was about technical credibility. It was about being excellent in my craft. It was making sure that I could get that greater responsibility, earn more money, really lots of material possessions, which I really had my heart set. I remember one of the presentations, you know when you dig up old digital files? I gave this talk back in, I think it was 2002. And the last slide was, next goal, and it was a picture of a Porsche, right? And I'm like, you're a moron, right? And yet I did buy one, right? So it's just, it was that, right? It was that part. And I look at my life and I'm like, oh yeah, I really did see success in that. So it was about that. And it was about individual achievement. And looking, I always wanted credibility in being a trusted member. I always wanted people to believe that they could come to me and that we would work something out together. That was always a big part of it. And then as time's progressed, and it's not a big leap, right, to figure where these things have, evolved for me. But it's really around that leadership credibility. It's about impact now, like I talked about earlier. The shared successes, huge part for me is raising caring citizens. And I don't care if that's at home or at work or anywhere in between in the community, but the world needs more care, especially now, in my opinion. And so there's a big piece for me in purposeful leadership about raising caring citizens. And then there's the global citizenship component, right? As the world's barriers have kind of come down, maybe they're going maybe more up again. But nonetheless, there's a global citizenship component, I think, that became huge for me and for a lot of what I felt passionate about. And then the last is about that collective achievement, right? It goes a little bit more with my build and not climb anymore, but the collective achievement. I really do. I took the time about a year ago to step back and do people know Simon Sinek? He's the Start With Why author. It's a bit of the purpose-driven, mission-driven stuff. I took the time to invest in just doing a bit of a workshop on my own on that. And sometimes I'm a little cynical or critical or both of some of those kind of leadership workshops, but I did this one on my own, and it was really good for me because at the end of the day, it didn't tell me anything I didn't already feel or didn't know about myself, but it really was informative in terms of, I really do get kicks out of watching all kinds of great people around me do totally crazy, amazing things that no one ever thought possible. That's when I feel best. And so that kind of came together for me quite nicely on the collective achievement piece. And so to wrap it all up, I don't know where to aim that. It's, to me, and I know the theme was purposeful leadership today, so for me, I always wrestle in this box, that center portion there, the Venn diagram, right, for this achieving self-actualization. And I think everybody in their own right is working towards self-actualization, right, which is really the self-image and then pairing that up with future self-state. For me, and these are my words and these are what sit with me, and I would ask for you to think what they might be for you. I get that through being adaptable, through being authentic, right, for really caring about the world, for being connected to others and being, humble. And lifelong learning, that's a huge one. It's always been one for me. Maybe it's underpinned in that I don't want to be irrelevant, but I really just think, like my mom always says, you're learning something, and I could sit by a rock and learn something because I'll just watch the world around it, right? So that's a big one for me. So that's part of me getting to self-actualization. And then I think purposeful leadership really, as leaders, is about communicating our belief in someone. That's huge. It's powerful. I think sometimes we forget and miss that. It's going out of your way to create opportunities for others. And it's recognizing that, maybe some portion of the story makes sense to you and that different people are different. They are unique. They'll be in their own journeys. They'll have their own desires and needs and fears. And as leaders, being conscious of that and at least being empathetic to that, I think goes a long way. And then as the leaders and as people who are also still growing, I think our obligation to ourselves is time for self-reflection, being open to being vulnerable, and getting pretty comfortable with being uncomfortable, which kind of for me means standing up here. So that's my story, and happy to chat some more. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. And thanks for sharing your story, your career story. I can certainly relate to a lot of the things that you discussed. And I know there's a lot of folks here that can do that as well. But maybe for some of the younger folks in the audience, I just had a couple of questions to maybe expand on some of the points that you've made. So maybe to start with, how does one drive their career forward with limited ability to work extra hours while balancing your young family at home?
Yeah. Yeah. That was the toughest question, right? Yeah. I think the advice I would give there from my own experience, and then just being an ardent supporter of people around me that are at, in that phase too, is you have to be judicious with your time, for sure. And lots of people will want to decide what your boundaries are, but really only you are in charge of your boundaries. I think that's a really big part of it. Having said that, because that's an easy thing to say, I think the other part of it that's been huge for me is recognizing that I have to build a support net, both internal to wherever I happen to be working, and also externally, right? So there's a lot of commentary always about, it takes a village to raise kids. It takes a village to run a career. It really does. And I think that's the piece I would reflect on most, is just making sure that you have some allies on both sides of that fence, and that you are judicious with your time, because then I think that you'll create the opportunities you need for yourself to handle both.
I think that's really good advice. So Toyota is a really large company. We have many divisions here, and being good at your job isn't always enough to be recognized at the higher level. So what avenues would you recommend to team members outside of their normal scope of work to enhance their network within the company?
Yeah, so with the exception of the company I'm in now, most of the two others that I've worked at through the majority of my career were larger companies as well, not as big actually as Toyota, but I think that in the larger enterprises, one of the ways that I was purposeful about this in my own right was I sought mentors in different functional areas. So I was in engineering, I was in the technical management track, but I went out of my way to go and find the head of finance and ask for some financial training. I went out of my way to go talk to the head of operations and ask for some time, and being respectful of, these are busy people as well. But it's been very rare in my career that I haven't reached out to somebody for help and they've said no. So I think just that first, getting over that maybe first hesitation to go ask for that help. So one would be looking at, building some relationships with other people in different areas through like a mentorship kind of role. It doesn't have to be formal. I know a lot of companies have formal programs, but sometimes just a 25-minute, a half an hour coffee conversation where you ask three, thought out questions or one thought out question ahead of time can be really good. At the end of the day, you're learning, and for me, that learning piece was a huge component, but I also believed I needed to understand the broader business in order to do better in the business. But I think that profile comes through that too. I think you're building your own personal network through that professional space, as well as being genuine about looking to achieve, some value out of that dialogue. And then I think the other piece, and this is contrary to the last question on how do you put some boundaries on people wanting your time, but I know in the larger companies that I work for, and even with some of the not-for-profits I've done work with, there's always somebody who needs help with something, right? Whether they're asking or not, but there's always other projects, there's other cross-enterprise kind of cutting initiatives. I'm assuming this might actually be one of them that we're participating in today. There's sign yourself up, don't overdo it. I would say be careful about that time boundary, but looking for ways to just get engaged in a place that's not your natural area or natural circle of influence, again, helps to build profile. It builds new perspective opportunities and new knowledge bases. So I think those are probably what I kind of look towards.
Sometimes you just have to go and ask.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes you do have to go and ask, yeah.
And people are quite often willing to support a small discussion or whatever, so you could have...
Can I add one more thing to that? Because actually I'll riff off of something you just said. One of the things I've always said, so even as, in the last organization I was in, when I was leading engineering and product globally, there's about 225 people in the groups across 4 different continents. And no matter which office I was in, I always said this. I always told people, you own your own careers and your own career development. And so if you're not talking or asking, the management team will make decisions based on what they think, right? And 9 times out of 10, we'll probably get that wrong. So I always encourage everybody, I always live by this philosophy, but I always encouraged everybody, just talk to, again, build that network, but just share your thoughts, your ideas, your goals, all those sorts of things. I think that's another way. If you're not communicating what you want to do or where you want to contribute or learn or have experiences, then the people around you may not know. Right, and then, so put yourself into that control position, I think, is the other part.
Maybe ask to join a project or be a member of a business partnering group here at Toyota would also support that. I'm just going to ask one more question before we go to the audience. So over your career, how did your management support your career goals as you climbed the ladder to success? Yeah,
I've had some amazing supporters, of which none are lost on me. And then I think the things that they have done that were probably the most profound for me were all of them gave me space. They gave me space to be, they gave me space to act, they gave me space to make decisions. And I didn't always make the right ones, and nobody ever will. But that was okay too. I wouldn't say it was an overly encouraging, fail and then what do they call it? Fast fail and fast recovery. No, that probably actually wasn't what I experienced. But they did give me space. And that was a huge part of it. They gave trust in terms of, whatever they were asking me to do or that I was suggesting I could do, they let me do it. And then the other part I would say that I've been very fortunate in is I've had the opportunity to work with a handful of leaders who don't treat knowledge as a currency, and they treat it as a commodity, meaning they openly share it. It is available to everybody. And they don't use it for power, control, or dominance. They use it as a way to help others grow. And that one is probably the most profound of the ones that I've experienced. It resonates with me individually. It's something I always aspire to do. But I think that was probably the two things combined that were the things that stand out most for me. So the space to do and the transfer of knowledge and information without reservation or any attachment.
It's great advice. So maybe we'll open it up to the floor for any questions.
It's a quiet crowd.
Yeah.
In case you want to turn around, it says 9 minutes and 54 seconds.
Okay, I think we'll end it there.
Great.
Thank you very much again.
Thanks everybody for having me. Hope everybody has a great weekend.
Before I turn it over, I just want to say two things. One is I want to recognize Peter. He looks awesome today. You've got a brand new sport coat, so stand up, Peter. Does he look great? I told you I'd notice. And the other is to recognize the young professional BPG here at TMMC for putting this on. I know there was a lot of work involved, and it went really well, like really smooth. I think you knocked it out of the park. And you can tell you put a lot of work into it. So thank you to everybody. Maybe they can stand up and let us know who they are.